Welcome back to another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Russell Bruce, and today we're gonna have a little conversation here about something that may make a little bit of us a little uncomfortable, but it's the elephant in the room that needs to be discussed. We're at the eve of an election, and there are a lot of talking points that get swept under the rug and never discussed and get talked around. So I'm going to go right at the elephant in the room and address it and bring some light to a couple things that people probably either one never heard of or never even thought about. So this is going to be about the Negro Holocaust, and it occurred during the period of 1880 to 1950. And this is something I've referred to several times. It's on the Yale New Haven website, Teachers Institute, and it's a curriculum that was created to shed some light on the topic that they created this curriculum for high school students as well as collegiate students. And to me, this is somewhat of a PG version, but I appreciate the fact that there's at least something out there that can be used as a central talking point to build upon. This particular thesis or curriculum speaks about the Holocaust from three different angles, right? It deals with the lynching, the race riots, and then the Black response. And the Black response basically was either Black people retaliated or decided to protest and march, things along that line. But there's so much more that could be discussed in reference to this, such as, the land theft, the paper genocide, the constant changing of the status in the nationality of a people. Uh, it started off as American Indian when the Europeans first arrived, went to colored, Negro, Black, African American, Black, and jumps all around, and there was a reason for it. Also, they could touch on abortion. There's been millions of abortions that have been performed in the Black community. And, that's not to put all the blame on anybody else, because I think there's a big moral piece that's missing there in the community that has to be dealt with as well. Broken families, the privately owned, profitable prison pipelines, the Black codes, and the biggest elephant in the room that we're even dealing with today is immigration or illegal immigration and the replacement of the people. So what I want to do is I want to start off with a video clip here from Dr. Claude Anderson. And about 12 to 15 years ago, somewhere around there, I first heard this lecture that he gave at a church. And he got very emotional. He actually started crying at one point about the poverty that he's seen as he traveled throughout the South. And he was somewhat speaking prophecy about what he's seen that was going to happen. He was very much tied into the political arena during his career in politics and tied to several presidents such as Jimmy Carter, et cetera. He worked on their staff. And let's jump right into this and listen to hear what he has to say.
But so the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that's going to drive us in this underclass structure will be conservatism. The second thing is that you're going to have an unending influx of immigrants into the country. And that's what Dr. Price is talking about. And nobody, no Black politician, no Black organization wants to deal with that issue. They will avoid it at all costs, even though in their heart they know that's one of the biggest problems with Black folk. We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a 3rd grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4. And the worst part about it is as you descend and go down to number 4, those other groups are going to go up. And as they go past you, you're going to have major racial clashes in this country. You have fights all over this country between blacks and Hispanics, blacks and Asians, blacks and poor whites. And black folk cannot fight all these groups. Everybody can not always be against black folk. They know that we are vulnerable, we are defenseless. And we cannot fight those groups. Because you see, they come into this country with the legacies that we are stuck with. Everybody in America has an advantage position with black folk. And with all the in a state of denial, the white power structure in a state of denial, they're pretending that everything they got, that 100% control and ownership of everything, they got it because they worked hard through a Protestant ethic. That's not how they got it. And you always think that, well, what you gotta do, you gotta work hard. Nobody can work any harder than a slave.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Dr. Claude Anderson, and he brings up some great points. Once again, this was, say, some 12 to 15 years ago that he gave this lecture, and he constantly talked about how we were running out of time to rectify this and to change it, and he gave a lot of solutions. He's written several great books. One of them I recommend everybody go out there and get is called Powernomics, and he actually created the Powernomics Institute as well. Let's do this. Let's go back to our document here, dealing with the Negro Holocaust. All right, so in this particular article here, it starts off in the narrative talking about the United States has a brutal history of domestic violence. It is an ugly episode in our national history that has long been neglected. Of the several varieties of American violence, one type stands out as one of the most inhumane chapters in the history of the world: the violence committed against Negro citizens in America by white people. This unit of post-Reconstruction Afro-American history will examine anti-Black violence from the 1880s to the 1950s. The phenomenon of lynching and the major race riots of this period, called the American Dark Ages by historian Rayford W. Logan, will be covered. Immediately following the end of Reconstruction, the federal government of the United States restored white supremacist control of the South and adopted a laissez-faire policy in regard to the Negro. The Negro was betrayed by his country. This policy resulted in Negro disenfranchisement, social, educational, and employment discrimination, and peonage. Deprived of their civil human rights, Blacks were reduced to the status of quasi-slavery or second-class citizenship. A tense atmosphere of racial hatred and ignorance and fear bred lawlessness, mass violence, murdering, and lynching. So once again, the time period that they put here is 1880s to the 1950s. And I speak to a lot of people, and a lot of people are not big on history and dates and timelines. You know, it wasn't my favorite topic. In high school, I used to cringe in history every time they got to the period where they talked about slavery and civil rights, et cetera, because it just kind of made you feel dirty and as if you did something wrong. But let's go back and look at the timeline. How did we even get here, right? Slavery ends 1865. So you'll hear a lot of people talk about the Civil War, and that the Civil War was about ending slavery. A lot of people have different views on it. I have different views as to what it was actually about as well. So 1865, slavery ends. You have an influx of immigrants starting to come in from Europe into America at this time. And between 1880 and say 1920, 1930, millions upon millions, tens of millions of Europeans came in and flooded the American cities. And the result was turmoil. You have the Ku Klux Klan that was created right around the 1865 time period, and basically made up of foreigners and people who were in government trying to make power moves and land grab and take control of America. One of the things that they don't say about the so-called Negro in America, right? Negro was a term when the Spanish and Portuguese first started the slave trade, referring to dark skin or black people, referring to them as Negro. Negro just means black in Spanish, Portuguese, right? So during that particular time period, these foreigners went to war with our people. So you could take a look at most of the race riots that broke out across the nation. They were in cities where black people were thriving. They had strong government. They were very prideful people. They dressed well. They ate well. They were very religious / spiritual people, very morally correct, invented great things in this country. If you look at the list of inventions, the things that you need to build civilization and advance technologically, et cetera, these people were inventing it all. Matter of fact, if you just look across the nation at most of these Capitol buildings and even the White House, they'll say it was built by slaves. But in most cases, if you really research deeply, these were built by free black people in most cases. You know, this is where the elite, or say the kings or the chiefs, actually resided. You even have like prisons like Alcatraz, some of these other places were actually castles at one point. So there's a very deep, rich history that has been hidden in this country. And, you know, you have a situation like Carter G. Woodson, in his quote, he said, in life, you get two educations. There's one that's given to you, and then the other one that you give to yourself. Because he found out, even going to an Ivy League school and getting what was deemed as a great education in his society, he knew nothing about himself. And as he dug deeper, he found out that there were a lot of fallacies in history and a lot of omissions, you know, like the history of Black people. And I'm using the term Black. That's going to be a conversation for another day. We got to get away from using that term for a particular reason, because in the court of law or in an international court, when you're trying to bring a case, it's not a nationality. It's more of a descriptor. And in some cases, it's a very negative descriptor and it has negative connotations. Even though people are very prideful, like we could take a lot of words like the N word and justify like the positive aspects of it. But on an international level, when you're dealing with trying to protect an indigenous group of people, you must refer to a nationality and not a paint job or a descriptor. So let's go to the chapter here where lynching comes in. Like, did people just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to start lynching Black people? What was the reason? You have a situation where these Black people at the end of slavery, now they're free. They have the right to buy land, even though you could look in the 1830s, there were a lot of black landowners. So you have to ask yourself during slavery, who was selling land to black people, or were they already here and historically were the landowners? And then even during slavery, there were more than just black slaves. Slavery starts off, they were enslaving the indigenous people here that they referred to as Indians. And they were not just those who came across the Bering Strait and have more of an Asiatic DNA or phenotype. You have in the Southeast culture where most black people, if they trace their roots, even if you're from Chicago, New York, et cetera, Detroit, most of your ancestors came from the Alabamas, the Louisianas, the Georgias, Tennessee, et cetera. So basically from Virginia all the way down through Florida, going across over to Texas, 90% of black people, if you study your genealogy, your people migrated from these areas or were forced off the land during this time period. And once again, people wanted your land. This area of the world has one of the most temperate climates, very rich soil, very resourceful, something that people don't talk about. They're always looking to other nations, talking about resources such as oil and copper and all this other good stuff. But here in Americas, we were pretty much feeding the world with our crops. Like corn is indigenous to the Americas and ended up all over the world. The cotton, tobacco, when you look at the paintings in Europe and throughout the world in the 1600s, 1700s, they painted pictures depicting on who they were trading with. And they were the Negro people of America. All right. So the people who came here wanted the cotton industry. They wanted the tobacco industry. They wanted it. Let's jump into this. I'm kind of just going off on a tangent. There's a lot to cover here, and I'm going to try to keep it short and to the point and keep it powerful at the same time. So lynchings in the last decade of the 19th century, the lynchings of black people in the southern border, in the southern and border states became institutionalized method used by whites. And so when they say in here, the southern and border states, basically the main thing people were after were the ports. So you have port cities like New Orleans, Galveston, different like parts of Miami and Charleston, Jamestown, Virginia. You had these port cities. This is where a lot of trade and commerce was taking place. And this is where the money bag was. And this is what people really wanted. It was about money. It was about wealth. And it was just power. All right. So getting back to this. All right. In the South during the period of 1880 to 1940, there was a deep-seated and all-pervading hatred and fear of the Negro, which led white mobs to turn to lynch law as a means of social control. Lynchings, open public murders of individuals suspected of crime, conceived and carried out more or less spontaneous by a mob, seem to have been the American invention. In lynch law, the first scholarly investigation of lynching was written in 1905. Author James E. Cutler stated that lynching is a criminal practice which is peculiar to the United States. And this is pretty interesting because I've been running across a lot of good information, right? Or a lot of information that doesn't get talked about. Like people don't talk about how, like let's go back. 1492, the Moorish Empire falls in Spain. It lasted from 711 to 1492. These black folks ruled Europe and mainly out of the Iberian Peninsula, like right around what today is called Spain, Italy, in that particular area. But they were throughout Europe, but that's where the stronghold was. 1492, it falls. Isabel and Ferdinand send Columbus out to so-called discover new territory. But the Moors were already coming back and forth to the Americas. So it wasn't no secret. He wasn't lost. He didn't think he was India. That's one of the fabrications. Also, he never came to North America. He went to the islands. He went to like Haiti. He went to Puerto Rico. There were 4 different trips that he took, but he never came to North America. People like DeSoto, uh, Alberto Vespucci, not Amerigo Vespucci, which everybody says. So America wasn't named after him. His real name was Albert, not Amerigo. He probably changed his name afterwards, naming it after an area that they conquered, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, you have a situation where these people were all looking for a new homeland at the end of the Moorish Empire falling. So you had crypto Jews and Moorish Muslims, and then you had the Catholic and Protestant wars going on. So people were getting expelled and they were coming into what was being created during the 1600s, the 13 colonies, right? So the 1400s, these Spanish people came fighting with the Indians in Florida, et cetera, kind of got the beat down, end up going into Mexico and other places, right? But by the time the 1600s get here, you have a Scottish king by the name of King James VI of Scotland. And at the time, he united the crown by becoming the king also of England. So he was King James I of England and King James VI of Scotland. So when you see those two, it's not 2 different people. It's the same person. He's just ruling 2 different kingdoms at the same time. Actually, he was ruling over Scotland, England, and Wales. And so King James in the early 1600s, around 1609, creates the first charter to set up the Virginia colony with a company called the London Company of Virginia, where they had stockholders, et cetera, and they came in and they had charters with the indigenous people who were here. And from there, his son, King Charles I, his grandson, King Charles II, and his son, King James II, they came in, set up these particular colonies along the eastern seaboard. So the 13 states. So the 13th one was Georgia, was the last one to come into the fold. And that one was set up by King George. So you have these immigrants coming in from Europe, setting up these 13 colonies. And what they don't tell you is a lot of them were ancient Black bloodlines that were tied from these Moors and ancient Black European bloodlines. So I've been doing a lot of people's genealogy over the last couple of years. And after doing, say, like 100 or so, I see a pattern. What I don't see is a lot of Africans on their tree. I don't see any, to be honest with you, is showing that the majority of the bloodlines with the Scottish, Irish names that most Black people in this country have are coming from Europe. And the Scots weren't the ones orchestrating the slave trade. So how did these Scottish, Irish names end up with Black folks? So I did a podcast on this called Black Irish in America. I'm going to do a part 2 of that and go into more detail with a lot of the new findings. But one of the things I did see is after the migration into the 13 colonies of some of these people of color, right? Because there was a combination of, Black, even mixed race, et cetera, that were coming in from Europe, settling in Virginia, Carolinas, et cetera. And in most Black people, when they study their genealogy, they're going to have a line, in most cases, that come through this particular area. But one thing that people don't talk about are the white slaves that were in these colonies as well. You know, they want to say they were indentured servants to make it sound like they had a different experience, but they were Black slaves as well as white. And here's a little proof from a secondary source. Uh, this site is showing the history of the death penalty in the United States, and it's listing like by name, by name, race, sex, occupation, what crime, how they killed them, etc. So you can see this lynching was going on even back in the 1700s in this country. They didn't play with criminals back in the day. When King James and the family set up the 13 colonies, like 1609, they write the first charter, right? He sets up the first charter in Virginia. 1611, the King James Version of the Bible, which I'm talking about, can't go into that right now. I don't have all the information, but they were pretty much wanting to use scripture, the laws of the Bible to rule the land. So anything outside of the moral code called for this kind of stuff, which was lynching, et cetera, right? But you can see right here, there was a slave revolt. You can Google slave revolt in New York, 1712. And when you read that article, all right, New York slave revolt 1712 was an uprising in New York City in the province of New York, 23 black slaves. They killed 9 whites, injured another 6 before they were stopped. More than 70 black people were arrested and jailed. Of these 27 that were put on trial, 21 were convicted and executed. So this is what we're starting to find a lot of, is that the wordplay, and Wikipedia is probably not the best source because anybody can go in here and manipulate it. But you see this in the school system, right? How, you know, they constantly label us as African slaves and African people. If they want to hide the fact that they were slaves, they'll call them African slaves or call them black or what have you, right? So a lot of times you'll see, going back into the 1700s, sometimes you'll see that black and white were more or less statuses than actual races. But we're going to ride with this one right now. But here's a contradiction, because this right here says that these 21 black people were placed on trial, or 21 people were convicted and executed. But when we go back and look at this document, it shows 21 people that were white slaves during a slave revolt that were hung, burned during this 1712 revolt. So this is the kind of stuff that we see in history. This right here is a primary source, unbiased. Something else I found on here that I thought was interesting, I went back to 1831 because Nat Turner, who led the slave revolt in Virginia, just wanted to see if it was documented, right? So I go back here to 1831, and lo and behold, what do I find? Nat Turner. Right here, line 2418. Nat Turner, black male, slave. Make sure I'm on the right line. So slave revolt, hanging, November 11th, 1831. You could Google that. That's right and exact. My birthday is November 11th, so I remembered that date. So he's even listed in here. So, and it has him labeled correctly as a black man. So you could see they weren't discriminating on who got that smoke. You know, and there are different crimes here: accessory to murder, blah 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 blah. You had rape, etc. They were hanging people back in the day. But when it comes back to what was going on with Black people in this country, it was pretty much a power move. They wanted them off the land because they were heirs to the land. And to this day, there's patents out there that show who the heirs are to this land. And people know it. A lot of these people were chased off their land. You see a situation in California just recently. You can Google this as well, where Bruce Beach, another name was Manhattan Beach in California, where the Bruce family were able to get the land back. The Klan and state government actually used eminent domain after they chased them off the land illegally, and they were sitting on the land. And you'll see this in thousands of cases across the country. I recently did a video on it was dealing with the systematic racism in America, but it was tied around the murder of George Floyd, right? So George Floyd's two-time great-grandfather, on his mother's side was Hillary Stewart Sr. He was a Black man in the Carolinas who had 500 acres of land, very wealthy at the time, and was swindled and cheated out of his land and ended up dying in poverty. And of course, then his son, Hillary Stewart Jr., was in poverty and ended up having to share a crop. And it goes down to his mother, who ended up in poverty as a result of them losing land instead of growing up with the land wealth that should have been passed down to the heirs in the family. So looking at that, George Floyd would have been the next male heir in line. But instead, he grows up in poverty, gets caught up one day writing a bad check in the store, right? So you could see how his fate changed through historical consequences, right? But this is the story of the Negro in America, where millions of people were pushed off their land stolen, and to this day, many of these people don't even know that they are heirs to land that's out there. So I would advise everybody to start talking to your grandparents, your auntie, your uncles, find out where your people came from, dig into these records, find your land, reclaim your land. Don't sit back and wait for a government to hand crumbs of reparations when you could have hundreds of acres, if not thousands of acres of land sitting out there. Like I had ancestors in the Virginia area that had 1,600 acres. It's no longer in my family name. I'm trying to figure out who has it. Where is it? Like, was it sold? I don't see where they sold it. So we need to find out. We got questions. All right, so back to the document. So the lynching period was when a large influx of Europeans began to migrate in and wanted the land, and working along with the Klan and the government began to chase Negroes off the land and lynch them. All right, so you have a situation where 90% of Black people were in the southern states, most of them landowners, now begin to migrate north, fleeing, trying to get away from what was going on here in the South. So once they start to get up into the north, now you end up with a situation where they're in lower numbers and they're fighting for employment with other immigrant groups that have come in. So now you're dealing with the labor unions, et cetera, and race riots occur as a result, because now people are fighting for resources in another territory. So now Black folks are caught up in a real trick bag, right? So race riots in the decade immediately preceding World War I, a pattern of racial violence began to emerge in which white mobs assaults were directed at entire Black communities. These race riots were the product of white society's desire to maintain its superiority over blacks. Bennett's frustration in times of distress and attack those least able to defend themselves. In these race riots, white mobs invaded black neighborhoods, beat and killed large numbers of blacks, and destroyed black property. In most instances, blacks fought back and were many casualties on both sides. And there were many casualties on both sides, though most of the dead were black. Gunnar Myrdal opposed the use of the term riots to describe these interracial conflicts. He preferred to call the phenomena a terrorization or massacre, and considered it a magnified mass lynching. Race riots occurred in both North and South, but were more characteristic of the North. They were primarily an urban phenomena, while lynching was primarily a rural phenomenon. So you see a situation where, you know, if mobs could attack individuals and they outnumbered them, they would lynch them in the South, and up North, they would just out and out go to war. So 9 times out of 10, this was started based upon a lie. You'll hear the cases, such as like the case of Emmett Till, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Even in Wilmington, it is always something that, some black man either touched, raped, killed, did something to a white woman, only later to find out it was a lie. Same thing happened here in Georgia, just north here of Atlanta in Oscarville, which is now Lake Lanier. Same thing. They falsely accused a black man of murdering a white woman, only later to find out that it was a fabricated lie. They went to war with these people, killed them, stole their land, flooded the town out. And today it's a wealthy tourist spot that, you know, was once a thriving black community where the land was just stolen, flooded out, placed in eminent domain, and these black people were displaced from their homeland. But the weird thing is there's actually a movie out there. You might want to check that one out, dealing with Oscarville. So Google that one. I actually watched that. It was pretty interesting because it's showing how you end up with a lot of these freakish type deaths that are occurring there, and people claim it to be very haunted. So this was just one of thousands of instances. You could see like Mississippi, how it was flooded. A lot of these towns, even as recent as what happened in New Orleans. People want to blame it on a natural phenomena, but you hear people talk about that they heard explosions, etc. But once again, to keep from being called a conspiracy theorist, let's stick with what we know that's documented, because there's more than enough that's documented, right? We're looking here at a very prestigious institution, which is Yale, putting this out for people to discuss, right? Once again, even though it's somewhat PG, you know, it's a talking point like what we're doing now. So we could continue to stick our heads in the sand and pretend that none of this stuff is occurring, or we could talk about it. If we're really wanting to institute real change, we're going to have to talk about and address the elephant in the room. So one other thing I want to jump into right here is what's going on currently, right? So yesterday I stumbled upon this lady here, which they're discussing immigration policy and what its impact is in the Black community, and particularly on Black males. So let's listen in. And her name is Donna Jackson.
Yes, I serve on the board with Kathleen on there, but I'm also the Director of Membership Development for Project 21 Black Leadership Network. And I think that's important to understand. We are a center-right organization. So I'm saying this to say that the majority of the people that actually call or I come in contact with usually are center right. Something has changed. I get more phone calls from elite Black liberals than I do from conservatives or people who lean conservative that are Black. And what has changed over the last 2.5, 3 years? Illegal immigration. I get phone calls at 11 o'clock in the morning from pastors, from leaders of NGOs, from community leaders, asking for my help that would never have the same policy and believe in the same policy issues that I do. But they're asking for help because for the first time, the straw that broke the camel's back is mass illegal immigration in Black communities. I have a large network in Chicago of Black pastors who called and said, can you help us? There's reality and there's perception. And we need to not understand how powerful perception is. Here's the perception of African-American males. They think that mass immigration of illegal immigrants in their community is so that they can swap out Black people for brown. They believe that they're put there deliberately to take those jobs. Low industry, low skilled jobs that are historically held by African-American males. They believe that they're there to displace them so that they don't have economic power so they can be pushed back. Second, they believe that they're there so that they can take control of their community. I hear from leaders in Black urban communities that don't mean right, are saying to me that they're meeting with people and they're seeing these immigrants in their community actually recruiting members to be gang members. Why? Because they want to take control of the community. They believe that there's a plot to make sure that there is no Black ownership of businesses, of housing, because they have deliberately planted all of the illegal immigrants purposely in minority communities to sow discord. The last thing that I would hate to say, but it's true, is that they believe that the left is deliberately setting up a scenario where there's going to be a racial war not between Black and white, but between Black and brown. The fact that the majority of the illegal immigrants that you've seen in the last year are actually male, military age individuals. A lot of those individuals have been incarcerated, gang members, all of these situations. That we have a community that is the Biden, I call him Lock 'em Up Joe, right? Now he didn't just take fathers out of the house, he took fathers out of the community completely. So there's already a shortage of Black males in the community. Now you're putting mass amounts of Black Army ready illegal immigrants in there. What do you think is going to happen? Now, perception is a powerful thing. For the first time, you have Black males who historically lean left that are all of a sudden moving to the right. Why? Because economically, they're being pushed down the ladder, and these other people are coming, illegal immigrants that are being pushed forward and on a pedestal. Imagine this, and I was thinking about this. The average income, median income for African Americans just nationwide, $35,700 a year. That's somebody that's doing well. That's the median income. That translates to about a little bit over $31,000 a month pre-tax. $3,100 a month pre-tax. If you add in the 15%, because they still have to pay tax, that's about $2,600 a month. From that, take away rent, which the average is $1,500 a month. In Chicago, $1,800 a month. If you're lucky, you can share an apartment with somebody, maybe not. So you're deducting that. Now you gotta take out your transportation costs, you have to take out your food costs. Legal immigrants can come into this country, they get $2,200 a month for SSI. They get free rent. So let's add that. $2,200 average, $1,500 of free rent. They're already up to $3,700 a month. Then you add in, and if you use the Eric Adams model, they get another $1,400 in a debit card to pay for food and clothing and whatever accessories. So now you have people on this end who might have about $400 a month to spend if they're probably going to be in the hole because they got other accessories that come up. These people over here are actually living an upper middle class life. Why? They're being rewarded for crossing the border illegally. And that doesn't even include the fact that they get free college. They get free healthcare. So the perception is actually meeting reality when you see that there are people who have been fighting for freedom. And when you hear people say racism, when you hear Black people say racism, what they're talking about is financial freedom, financial stability. I don't feel as financially stable as this person over here that's doing well, or this person over here that can afford all their bills, this person that can take care of their family. And in this sense, Black people are being pushed back, illegal immigrants are being propped up. So all of a sudden, individuals that haven't even achieved financial freedom, haven't achieved it, fighting for decades, are now looking at people who have an instrumental amount of financial freedom. I want to give you another story. I was in Memphis, Tennessee for the last 3 weeks. Federal Express was laying off natural born citizens to hire illegal immigrants. They were laying them off, not only them, but it was another large company that you would know, laying off legal citizens to replace them with illegal immigrants. In the city of Chicago, the school board is considered a sanctuary city, which means that illegal immigrants get preferential treatment and hiring over natural legal citizens. They already get 2 board seats without running on the school board over natural citizens. Who's getting pushed to the back of the bus? I can tell you something, we're holding on to the tailpipe of the bus. We're not even riding it after you put the amount of benefits that illegal immigrants have. It was really a slap in the face when the city of Chicago opened up closed schools to house illegal immigrants.
They're not immigrants, they're illegal aliens. This is what the Democratic Party has done, or the political left has done to America. They have taken the word, they have taken control of the usage of words. They've, excuse me, 75% single-headed.
All right, hold on 1 second here. I want to get to this other other part right here. Let's see.
Of the hotels. But the perception is reality. They're seeing that reality every day. They're walking over and walking past Black men, young men who have no opportunities, who are sleeping in the street in boxes, while illegal immigrants are getting free housing already. In New York City, 135 of the hotels. New York City is the most expensive city in America to rent a hotel room. 135 hotels of the 700 hotels, that's a significant number, are now housing illegal immigrants. They're
Illegal aliens.
illegal aliens.
I mean, I can't stand
African Americans who will never have the opportunity not only to go to New York City, but to stay in a luxury hotel. And yet, illegal people breaking the law, coming over to the border, are actually getting a free ride. They have an American dream that African Americans will never realize in their lifetime. And how are we okay with this? It's the reason why you see the shift. You're seeing the shift from the left to the right, because that is the last straw. Fighting my entire life for financial stability, for my family. And then here this person gets rewarded for breaking the law. Not only does he hit the lottery, because I still have student loans and they get to go to college for free.
This has been going on since the 1800s. If you know the history, you know it's been going on since the 1800s. Black Americans being replaced, newly freed slaves being replaced by mass immigration. Now it's illegal aliens. And Simone D. Sanders on MSNBC said we can't even say the word illegal aliens. She was saying that to Byron Donalds. That's not true. It's in our, you're anti-American if you don't go by the laws on with the United States Code. It's anti-American. You're anti-Black American if you're pro-illegal aliens. This is the position. If you look at the history, if you know the data, you know illegal aliens, mass immigration since the 1800s has adversely impacted Black Americans. It's clear, it's documented. So anyone allowing illegal aliens into the country is anti-Black America. The Democratic Party is anti-Black America, and the Democratic Party has destroyed the Black American family. We only have 75, there's only 25% two-parent households, and 75% single-headed households. White liberal women push free sex feminism / sexual liberation. This destroyed the American family, destroying the American family, destroying Black American families. All these policies, all the policies of the Democratic Party stink. They have destroyed America. They have destroyed the family. John Adams says that for a country to be free and prosperous, the citizens must be moral and be of good moral character. The family is the most important institution in society. You have Black men who cannot marry Black women. Why? Because they don't have income, they don't have wealth. Why? Because mass immigration, illegal aliens. It's clear, it's very clear.
All right, guys. At this point, once again, I'm going to declare fair use. This is for educational purposes only. And also, as far as political beliefs, I myself, I'm independent, don't have a dog in a race. I'm still yet convinced that anybody who's running has a viable plan for myself and my people. And until I hear that, I'm standing down. And let's continue on with this build here. We're going to be wrapping it up here shortly. One of the other things is, like a lot of people who have this very patriotic view as to being an American, right? It's almost as if they try to treat Black Americans as if they're unpatriotic, like if they want to take a knee like Kaepernick did, etc. But as I do my genealogy and hundreds of others, all I see are Black individuals who fought in the Civil War, in the colored troops on both sides, right? On both the North and the South. They also fought in World War One, World War II, and everybody knows, the roles that we play in current wars, right? So America would not be America if it was not for Black people. And if most Anglo Saxon Europeans are honest, the majority of your ancestors came post Civil War. Post Civil War. So we were always here, and you can't prove that we came over here from Africa on slave ships. That story is starting to get debunked. You can go to slavevoyages.org. Less than 5% of African slaves even came to America. There were more Indian slaves taken out of America, taken to Africa and Brazil and to the islands and even back to Spain. So when you look at it, a lot of the stories were told in reverse. Want to find this clip, Martin Luther King, where he was talking about, hold on one second here. I'm going to start this over. Hold on one second. Many of you may not have seen this. This was after the March on Washington, and it got to the point where he started to feel betrayed because he was actually working with the people trying to fight for integration, which, anyway, let me play this and I'll talk afterwards. So the white middle class, for the most part, was actually created by giving the land that was stolen from the indigenous people. And so at this point, he was starting to be angry. And this was close to the end of his life. And this is probably one of the reasons why, because he was going to march again on Washington during the Poor People's Campaign. And he was going to demand that they do something about it financially.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farm. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the Black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. This is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Martin Luther King, ladies and gentlemen, this is when he became a little bit more radical, and even the Black churches in the South start closing their doors on him and didn't want him to come speak because he was starting to sound more like Malcolm, and he was starting to feel as if, and he even mentioned it himself, he says that I'm integrating my people into a burning house. And LBJ had not convinced, but even stated that if he passed the civil rights legislation, that he would have Black folks voting Democrat for the next 200 years. So if you look at historically, during Reconstruction after slavery ends in the Civil War, Black people were acquiring wealth. They were actually like outnumbering Black people in most of the southern cities, and they controlled the politics as Republicans. And, once they were pushed off the land, and could no longer self-determine their own reality, and pushed into the reservation we call the projects housing units. So the ones that that didn't go to the reservations, because like by 1924, with the Racial Integrity Act, you were no longer allowed to classify yourself as Indian, like American Indian. So you had these Black Indian tribes throughout the South, which the majority of your grandparents tell you were either Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek, you know, they made it illegal. They would either jail you, hang you, or what have you. So a lot of them just claimed this Black status if they wanted to stay on the land. And these were the people who were getting moved out. Andrew Jackson with the Indian Removal Act in the late 1800s began to move on these people with the military to get them off their land, push them into what they deem Indian territory, say Oklahoma. But when you look at Oklahoma was full of Black towns, all Black towns. So where are these Asian type Indians? All you see is Black people. And smack dab in the middle of that, you end up with Black Wall Street. These people go there and turn around, rebuild, and built an empire, only for white jealousy to set in and for them to come in, not with just the Klan this time. They came in with planes bombing them and tankers. This was the act of the United States government military along with the Klan to destroy this town in Tulsa. All right, I'm gonna try to wrap this up. There's one more thing I wanted to cover is the classification of people. So once again, the whole thing of Black and white people were more so classifications than they were racial identities. So if you go back in the 1600s, 1700s, when people were first migrating here, it was like, hey, I'm French, I'm Scottish, I'm Irish, I'm English or British, Polish, like whatever nation or whatever they were coming from, and the people here were Indian, like wherever they were coming from, whether they were Black, brown, mixed race, or what have you, they identified with their nationality, not these descriptors. So I'll show you an example here. You have a situation where the government has constantly been not only changing Black people's nationality or description, they've changed others. And really, it's just to keep the numbers tight. Because if you look, they try to tell you the Black population. It seems like for the last 30, 40 years, we've been stuck at 40 million. That makes no sense when the rest of the population is growing. And we know that the white population is in negative population growth. They're no longer at zero population growth. It's negative. So they're dwindling. So what's happening now is you're seeing a situation where these newcomers who are coming across the border, they're getting classified as white people. And a lot of that is to control resources. So going back to what Dr. Claude Anderson was talking about in the beginning, if you were second-class citizens and weren't getting anything, what's going to happen when you're third, fourth, or what have you, right? So looking at this, the new Latino and Middle East, North African check boxes proposed for U.S. So this one's talking about how, once again, the Biden administration is trying to make some changes. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into that. But here's one that I've mentioned before in a previous podcast, right? This is what most people don't know. So when you look at this, the U.S. Census sees Middle Eastern and North African people as white. Even though these people don't see themselves as that, there's little reality. There's a little reality about race in the U.S. that has been confounded, that has confounded many people of Middle Eastern and North African descent. The federal government officially categorizes people with the origins in Lebanon, Iran, Egypt, and other countries in MENA. So MENA is Middle East, North African, is white. So if you come from these particular regions, they'll classify you as white. So I'm going to show you a little clip here. This gentleman here, let's see. Where did we go? I think I lost it. Here, I'm going to find it. But this gentleman was an Egyptian gentleman who they were trying to classify him as white, and he didn't want to be classified as white. And he goes in giving his reason for it. I think it's right here. Stand by. Yeah, I think this is it here.
Recent court cases, I want you to look it up. How we got to understand things when brothers reading black laws, and I said you got to understand when it's pertaining to your name.
Yeah, hold on. That's it, but not the one I had. It was pretty quick and to the point. Let's see how I can find this one. All right, I might have to use the one he's actually pulling up. I lost the one that I had. Let's see. Here we go. All right, let's jump into this.
I'm a black Egyptian. My father is much darker than I am. My mother is lighter than I am. In Egypt, people are identified by the religion first, not the race. So in Egypt, if you are Christian, you are a minority person. But if you're black, you're not a minority person. You are a part of the mainstream society. And I came from this background. And in Egypt, you identify as Arab and as Muslim. And in this country, when I first came, I identified myself as Arab American and Muslim first. And gradually, I became to identify myself as black. I came to the US in 1978, and I became a US citizen in 1985. When I became a US resident, I was told by the immigration naturalization that I'm white. And I told them that I'm black, and they said, no, in this country, you are white. All Arabs in this country, all Arab immigrants are white. I didn't pay much attention in the beginning to this because in the Arab world, we identify with our ethnicity first as Arabs, and then with the race second as black or white or whatever. But in this country, you identify with your racial group first and then with your ethnicity second. Gradually, I became black first and Arab second. And I rejected my white classification publicly for the first time in 1987, in February, as a panelist in a function sponsored by the Association of the Study of Black Life and History in Detroit. I said that I belong to two minority groups. I'm Arab American and Black American, and I'm racially Black and ethnically Egyptian. I was harassed by my employer right after that. I worked for a white school district. The superintendent is white, all the associate superintendents are white, even though that we provide services to 30% Black population. But the organization is white and the approach is very white. The attitude towards me changed completely after I went out publicly and rejected my white classification. One coworker came to me and told me, a white coworker came to me and told me right after the function that he met with the superintendent, and if I don't keep my mouth shut, my educational career is over. He said, you have nothing to do with these people, you have a history and a culture. These people came from the jungle, you have nothing to do with them. These people lie and steal. When I see one of them in my neighborhood, I call the police. And I was told by the director of general education, who is retired now, in '88, I was told by him that I get people angry when I say that I'm Black Egyptian. If I just say that I'm Egyptian, I would get along. I have to add that I was denied promotion twice because I chose Black classification. This is part of my 2 lawsuits against my employer, which are currently pending, 2 lawsuits.
Now, just for the education of our viewership, why don't you share with us a breakdown of Egypt as it is today, insofar as blacks or combinations thereof of European descent, what have you?
we don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was the ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black. And the Greeks came in 300 BC, and they started to intermarry with the local population. And then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered by the Arabs and kicked out by the Arabs in the 7th century. And these people intermarried with the Egyptian Copts, and they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Now, you're an educator, okay? Now, how do you deal with situations when you practice your profession insofar as dealing with the mythology or the misconceptions about Egypt being a white civilization? How do you deal with that?
This is a big problem because Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization was a black civilization, and ancient Egyptians were black according to the Greek scholars and the Roman scholars. Ancient Egypt became white only in the 19th century and in the 20th century. And the scholar who is responsible for this is Seligman, the noted anthropologist from England, Seligman. White supremacy argues that blacks are inferior than white intellectually, that they are subhuman and they are incapable of building a civilization. White supremacy had one dilemma until Seligman came. The dilemma was ancient Egypt was black according to the Greek and the Roman scholars. 10 of them said that, including Aristotle and Plato. 10 of them said that in writing. They had this dilemma. Ancient Egyptian was black. So if blacks are inferior intellectually and are incapable of building a civilization, how come the ancient Egyptians built a civilization? Seligman found the solution for this dilemma. He came up with a theory called the Hamite theory. He separated the blacks who built a civilization in Egypt and Ethiopia from the rest of the black race, and he called them brown-skinned whites, or the Hamites. So Seligman saved white supremacy from this dilemma, and all the white scholars followed him from that time on. This was at the end of the 19th century. And since that time, white scholarship says that ancient Egypt is white.
Mustafa Hefni is currently working.
All right. So that just gives you an idea. And one of the reasons I want to play that, because it ties into what happened here in America as well. But, you know, everybody's familiar with Egypt and, you know, how during the Berlin Conference, somehow Northeast Africa turns into the Middle East as if it's not part of Africa. And that's almost like saying New York is Middle America or something crazy like that, and separating it from the United States or North America. But this is pretty interesting. So they try to force people to take on these identities, and it's for numbers. So if you really were told the truth about the population here in America, I pretty much guarantee you that Black people are the largest race here in this country, because this was their country. And if you look back, primarily, like I said, they were in the Southeast for thousands of years, even going back to the period during the Ice Age. They would migrate in and out of Mexico and South America back into the Southeast. What people don't talk about, you know, we don't even have to claim Egypt, right? So most Black people, when they talk about having African ancestry, it's always West African, right? And that's a whole nother story, because they were trying to get get Black people to say they were African and go back to Africa when they had nothing to do with Africa. Like probably more ancient ties than recent, right? Our ties are to the Americas, North, South, and then also Central America. I'm going to show you something here. I'm getting ready to wrap this up here. Wanted to keep it 45 minutes to an hour. I see I'm going over, so apologize for that. I want people to be able to digest it. This is a big elephant, and you can't eat elephant in one bite. You got to break it up. And 1 second here, bottom. Just wanted to show you this. The same way they tried to say that Egypt was a white civilization, they try to say the Americas were, say, either Asian or, something other than what it was. So here are the Bonampak murals down in Mexico of the Mayans, what they left, showing themselves in their culture, right? Like the wife and I just came back from down in Tulum and in Cancun, going visiting the ruins. So you see cultures here, dark melanated people with dreadlocks. And to have dreadlocks, you need 9 ether here. Straight hair is not going to hold dreadlocks, especially for an entire culture. So where did these people go? So they'll tell you that, they died out or what have you, when all that really happened is maps were changed, geographical locations were changed. Like you'll have one period where people were, in Louisiana per se, say that was West Florida at one point. And, with the sale of the so-called Louisiana Purchase, then wake up the next day, you're in Louisiana. So what happened is a lot of the maps and so forth were changed. So anyway, getting back into this, here's an article from 1912 out of the Choctaw Advocate. Alabama was the area where there were Choctaw people there. So these Black people knew exactly who they were. So this article was a discussion in reference to Black people going back to Africa. So once again, you had the American Colonization Society, which was trying to get free Black people prior to the end of slavery to leave the land and convince them to go to Africa, because these Anglo Saxons were trying to colonize Africa, because now they're coming into power in the 1800s, right? So prior to that, they weren't in power, which is another myth. So this article is just pretty much talking about how Black people had amassed this wealth and land. So it's titled Negro Race Has Billions in U.S. So the return of colored people to the dark continent is impossible, owing to material progress made by them. So here, let's jump over here. So it talks about everything that they acquired. They had all this land, right? Let's jump right here so we can hurry up and end this. It probably will startle the world when it realizes that we have acquired at least 50 acres over $1 billion worth in real estate, Dr. Hawkins said. And that is only the beginning, and it's only the beginning of a rapid forward march, which the Negro is making as a businessman. The Negro could not help but being a businessman. He was surrounded with it for years of his slavery. He was taught how to drive a bargain in horses or real estate, even if his master didn't teach him how to read and write. So it goes on over here on the other side to talk about all that they actually acquired, right? There are 400 self-supporting newspapers daily, which today, that's why As soon as we start, when they buy it up, BET, Essence, all the magazines, anytime we started, our voice has been bought and it's controlled. So it's the thing about controlled opposition. If you control the media outlets, if you control the politicians, if you control the preachers, if you control all of the people that these people are going to listen to, that's why you see during politics on both sides right now, you know, you have comedians, you have people who are not politicians are the ones that they're putting up in front of you, even entertainers. It's starting to get ridiculous, right? There are 400 self-supporting newspapers daily and weekly owned, published by Negroes in the United States. 3,000 physicians have graduated from Negro and white schools and are now practicing among their people. 2,000 lawyers have been admitted to the bar in the United States courts of justice. 380 authors are found among our race. We own 41 schools and colleges, representing an investment of 38 million and 45 million has been spent in church property for Negroes. Negro men own and control 51 banks, which are prosperous and flourishing. 650,000 has been invested in Negro libraries. So it goes on and on and on, just showing how in a short period of time, these great advances that were occurring. And, you know, these are the things that fear people that fear our rise. And one of the reasons why every time there's an ask for reparations, they're going to create an investigation committee and they never do anything. So hopefully people aren't falling for that trick bag again. But what we should be doing is really investigating what happened just a couple grandparents ago, right? You know, you have people who want to foam at the mouth and argue about what happened in ancient Egypt 1,000 years ago or the Anunnaki millions of years ago, but don't even know what happened just yesterday, you know, with their great grandparents. So once again, what I advise everybody to do, start talking to your family members, find out the history of your family, you know, ask them, did we come from Africa? Were we always here? But what you're going to find out, though, is on most of your family lines, they were always here. A lot of the records in the 1870s were destroyed because that's when they were still in the land. So they'll tell you that they were all destroyed during the war. You know, you have all these other buildings and stuff still standing, but for some reason where all the records were being kept got burnt. But they know where these records are. But talk to your family. And then to the other people, if you really want to be real about, you know, coming together and creating racial harmony and, you know, creating, you know, we need to drop all these isms like racism, sexism, classism. We need to come together and change the world because right now we're at the brink of disaster, to be honest with you. You know, and if something doesn't change and give for the greater good of humanity, you know, we're all going to be doomed, right? So, last thing, matter of fact, let's end it there. I think that's too much. So, we'll have a part 2, 3, 4, 5 to this thing. So, once again, this is Russell Bruce, Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast, where we try to come and deliver things dealing with the heart, mind, soul, justice, family, male, female relationships, masculine, feminine relationships, and all the above. Until next time, peace.